As you may be aware, The Last of Us is one of the best video games of all time, with its narrative being one of its greatest strong points. I've been excited about the TV show ever since it was first announced, and now it's finally here. Does it live up to the hype and do the source material justice, or does it fall flat? Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video I'll be discussing the pilot episode for HBO's The Last of Us TV show, and giving my overall first impressions of it. Since this is the first episode, the first portion of this video will be spoiler free in case you're interested in the show but haven't checked it out yet. I will be giving a spoiler warning about midway through the video, so keep that in mind. The first thing to note is the fact that the episode is fairly long, clocking in at about an hour and 20 minutes. That being said, it still left me craving more. The show takes the prologue from the game where you experience the outbreak and downfall of civilization and expands upon it in ways that I do really enjoy. Some of it kind of felt like filler, but in a good way as the show takes its time developing the characters in a natural and organic way. Since you play as these characters in the video games, you instantly become more attached to them than you would be just watching them. Due to this, the show needed to figure out a way to engage you equally, even though it's obviously not interactive like the game was. So although some moments are remixed or expanded upon, for the most part, the show does a great job staying true to the source material. From reusing similar dialogue to following all the same story beats, you can tell that the creators of this show have put a lot of effort into it due to having a ton of respect for the game, along with understanding what made it so successful. This show seems to be carefully treading the line of being welcoming to new viewers while also paying respects to fans of the game, as there's just so many subtle references and Easter eggs, it's insane. So if you haven't played the games, I still think you'd enjoy the show, especially if you're a huge fan of the post-apocalyptic / zombie genre. The story is there, and the characters are set up well, and there's some amazing visuals throughout, seemingly showing how HBO didn't cheap out like other shows in the same genre tend to do. The pilot packed way more into it than I initially thought I'd see, with you picking up with Joel after the prologue and essentially setting up the first main arc of the story. As you may know if you're at all aware of the games, there's eventually a huge time skip jumping forward well into the apocalypse, to the point that most of the outskirts are completely dilapidated and overgrown with nature. Seeing all these amazing set pieces was a huge selling point to the original game, and after what I saw in episode 1, I have a gut feeling that we're in for a treat when it comes to the overall visuals of the world that we're thrown into. As far as the casting goes, I was a tad unsure of how I felt going into episode 1, but I was ready to give it a solid chance while moderating my expectations. With that in mind, I think the show, for the most part, is written quite well, and the actors do a pretty good job with the material given to them. The thing is, most video game adaptations have a reputation of either not living up to expectations or just flat out failing completely. Due to how much the creators of this show clearly respect the original games, thankfully the show is living up to expectations of translating everything good about the game into live action. Now, although the show isn't a complete one-to-one, it is very much so running a clear parallel, as 80 to 90% is pretty much the exact same. In my opinion, at least from what I saw from the first episode, they're definitely running with the idea of don't fix what isn't broken, but they still add in what they need to in order to properly translate the story from a game to television. Since playing through story beats in a game doesn't properly translate to the same amount of screen time, some moments are more fleshed out while others happen more quickly, and I think the show creators did a great job adjusting what they needed to in order to keep a steady pace going. So I definitely give this show my recommendation, especially if you're a fan of the games or the genre. If you've seen it already, let me know what you thought about episode 1 in the comments below, and with that in mind, let's go ahead and move into the spoiler territory for episode 1, You've Been Warned. So the show starts out with a long, drawn-out talk show from 1968 where we're explained the logistics behind what could hypothetically cause the outbreak. This is all completely original to the show, but since the parasite in the game is somewhat realistic due to being based off of a type of parasite in real life, I understand why the creators would want to start off the show explaining it. Although this causes the show to start off a bit slow, it is excellent world building. Plus, as soon as the intro sequence started playing, I got shivers due to the combination of the beautiful main theme song from the game, along with similar visuals from the game that's definitely meant to fuel any nostalgia you may have towards it. We then see the 2003 era as the outbreak slowly creeps up on our main characters, Joel, his daughter Sarah, and Joel's brother Tommy. In the game, this was considered as the prologue and only took about 20 minutes. Although the show spends just about the same amount of time in 2003, it feels much longer than it actually is due to the fact that it spans across an entire day, not just one evening. As I alluded to earlier, the show does this to further flesh out the characters in order for you to feel invested in them by the time that everything hits the fan. In the game, you start playing as Sarah, which is a great way to connect the player to her in order for her fate to feel impactful. Although the exact same method is impossible for the show, they accomplish the same goal by viewing most of the day through Sarah's eyes as we slowly get more and more hints at the larger picture of what's happening to the world. I do like the subtle breadcrumbs that are dropped hinting at the outbreak throughout the episode, from seeing police cars and emergency vehicles everywhere, to even the shops closing down early, news stories, etc. The whole elderly neighbor situation is part of the filler that I alluded to earlier, as you do confront an infected neighbor as your first glimpse of an infected person in the game, but it's much more brief than in the show. That being said, the show does a great job setting it up and creating tense moments out of it, such as that incredibly creepy moment of one of Sarah's neighbors exhibiting early signs of infection as she leaves, which had me clinging to the edge of my seat rooting for her to get the heck out of there. There's also payoff for it later on as Sarah searches the house to find the infected neighbor has taken out everyone else there, which leads into Joel and Tommy saving her and getting her into their vehicle. The truck segment is a fully realized live-action version of what we saw in the game, and I love every moment of it. The plane crashing was a great remix of them just getting T-boned by another vehicle. They also seem to subvert the expectations of people who have played the game by almost having them get T-boned by a vehicle, but then they continue on and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen next? And then the plane crashes. But for the most part, everything plays out pretty much identically, from first seeing the farmhouse burned down to splitting up with Tommy and meeting up back with him later on. Speaking of which, although the show made the army dude seem less sympathetic than in the game, the Sarah death is overall just as impactful. The show did a great job building up Sarah's character for this emotional, gut-wrenching moment, which still hits hard, even for people who already knew this would happen due to playing the games previously. Now, after Sarah's death, we jump 20 years into the future, just like the game. I remember way back when the game first released in 2013, one of the major selling points was getting to see the world 20 years into a zombie apocalypse, to the point that most of the untouched world has become overgrown with nature. As I mentioned earlier, the show does a great job representing this, at least so far, and I can't wait to see what else they have in store for us. This universe depicts more of a realistic portrayal of what would happen in a situation like this, in regard to the military still managing to create small quarantine zones. I think the show does a great job building its world from within the quarantine zone, from foreshadowing the Fireflies to setting up Joel and Tess as smugglers, even if some minor details are changed or remixed. It's interesting the way that the show introduces Marlene and Ellie, as they appear to have a much more distant relationship than in the games. That being said, I do like how the show introduces you to them before Joel and Tess run into them. Speaking of which, as Joel and Tess track down their partner who betrayed them, it's interesting how the show completely cut out the entire gunfight leading up to it, but I'll let it slide for now, as there are a fair amount of gunfights in the game that wouldn't be realistic to adapt into the show. See, the game takes itself very seriously in regard to its realism, but there's still some cliche video game disconnect of the player shooting their way through hundreds of enemies in order to keep things interesting gameplay-wise. I hope that the show will still depict key story beats throughout while being able to balance how much Joel would realistically be able to accomplish in this regard. So episode 1 ends with a confrontation with Joel and Tess being caught trying to smuggle Ellie out of the city, which again is a huge story beat from earlier on in the game, as it reveals that although Ellie's been infected, she's seemingly immune. Now, although the show slightly remixes this confrontation in regard to having only one guard catch them as opposed to multiple, it mostly all goes down the same, with Ellie stabbing him due to not wanting her infection to be discovered. The show diverts from the game in regard to Joel beating the guard to death, along with the setup of the guard previously dealing with Joel being completely original. Although I don't mind this, I do kind of dislike how the Ellie reveal is almost muffled out due to Joel being in shock over beating the guard to death. I get what they were going for though, with this being a small nitpick of mine, since the scene ends relatively the same overall, with them having to escape before they end up getting caught again, unable to properly process the Ellie immunity revelation. The show, however, did do a good job portraying why Joel lashes out at this guard, because the last time there was a guard pointed at him, he didn't do anything, so you get flashbacks to Sarah, and it explains why he does so. And then the last shot you see in the episode is how one skyscraper fell into another one, which is the exact same shot that you see in the game when you leave the quarantine zone for the first time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm surprised that the first episode got this far into the story, while still feeling like the pacing is spot on. Fun fact, episode 1 is an hour and 20 minutes, which is about how far into the game this scene happens as well. I assume the show will divert more as it goes on, but for now I just found that to be a fun little detail. Now before wrapping up, I'd be remiss to not emphasize some of the larger parallels and Easter eggs that the show makes in reference to the game, from many story beats to even using identical dialogue. Whether the show parallels the game with the same plot points, story beats, dialogue, or even props and wardrobe down to Sarah wearing the same shirt, it's clear the show is trying to be a love story to the original, which I really appreciate, and I think think other fans of the game will too. For example, there's Sarah giving Joel a watch, which he still keeps 20 years into the apocalypse as a reminder of her, even though it's been broken the entire time. The watch looks almost identical to the game, even down to the box that she gives it to him in. Their dialogue is almost identical as well, from Joel joking about how it's not working to Sarah joking about how she sold drugs to pay for it. The only difference is that instead of Sarah giving Joel a new watch, she only fixed his old one, but as she even says, it's the thought that counts. It also makes it ironic in a dark way that she fixed it just for it to get broken again when she dies. It's symbolic for many reasons, and I think it actually adds to the story due to her even telling him how he never would have gotten it fixed himself. I also wanted to bring up how they split up with Tommy during the outbreak just for him to show up later and save you moments too late. Assuming the car crash completely cut off Tommy from the alleyway, it does make sense, where in the original Tommy just holds a door shut from infected and tells you to run. But yeah, there's many moments of this show that literally parallel the dialogue in the video game, from Ellie telling Joel that he mumbles in his sleep or that his watch is broken, to during the truck sequence when Joel forces Tommy to keep driving instead of stopping and helping some random people, showing how he's morally gray. Tess telling Joel how she got jumped by two people and to not worry about it, but then eventually revealing that it was their former partner that sent them. There's a lot of moments where they just straight up reuse the dialogue that had me pointing at my screen like, oh, he said it, he said the thing, I remember that from the game. So I mean, it is pretty cool in that aspect, and they do portray it in the show really well where it feels natural to what they're trying to create, and I assume that there'll be plenty more of those moments as the show goes on. One of the only complaints that I wanted to address was the way that they've seemingly retconned the infected themselves. First off, I get what they were going for in regard to the parasite taking over its host by showing its tendrils slithering out of their mouths, but to be honest, it just looks like they're munching on a mouthful of hay. Also, are spores not going to be in the show, or have they just not been shown off yet? In case you don't know, in the games, infected can produce spores that contaminates the air and will infect you if you breathe them in, which can fill entire buildings, causing you to need to wear a gas mask to traverse them. Now, when Joel and Tess find a gross infected stuck to the wall, this happens in the game at the same point as well, but it causes the entire building to be filled with spores. In the show, that's never expanded upon, mentioned, or even acknowledged. We'll have to wait to see what they do in episodes 2 and 3 though, so put a pin in that for now. Although I would like to just review the show as a standalone, it's incredibly hard not to reference back to the video game and compare the two every second breath I take, especially considering how one-to-one so much of the show is in comparison to the game. So overall, I'd give episode 1 a solid 9 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's leagues ahead what I initially thought possible for a realistic live-action video game adaptation. Again, let me know what you think in the comments below, along with if having played the game or not has altered your opinion in any way. That being said, I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, subscribe for more Last of Us coverage in the near future, but most importantly, I thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out!